So welcome to this week's session organized by the Vedic Vision Society called Anatomy of Anger. So what we're going to do is examine anger from many different angles or perspectives, get a sense of its function, how it forms, and ultimately what we can do to manage anger with a full perspective and ability to reflect on that anger. Now, one thing, I guess, just to start with is understanding what is anger. And to do that, maybe let's think of how many of us have been angry in the last day or week. Like, I'm guessing by Shelley, maybe in the last week.
I think almost daily.
Oh, okay. I was thinking, okay. So it's a familiar experience. It's one of the daily highs and lows, that thing that gets our blood boiling. And I'm just curious, like, if you'd care to share, what are, like, just some experience, like, if you're not comfortable, that's fine, but if you could just share a recent experience where you felt angry.
Yeah, like I remember, it's always, I think, with few people. I think
Oh,
it's yeah. I don't know. Maybe severity is less, but I okay. I think that is my I think bad nature to expect always like okay people should behave like this. I think that is uh, very wrong, but I'm working on it, but I get angry for sure.
okay. And that's in many ways a normal response.
Mm.
So thank you for sharing that. And what are some of the words that you'd use to describe that feeling of anger? Like, just thinking back to a recent time when you felt angry, what are some words that you'd use to describe that feeling or that experience of anger?
I get irritated, like I verbally will not say anything or to that person like this is my recent I think changes. Previously if I remember I used to say it verbally, which is I think more like it's hurting to people.
I guess it
But
depends what you say.
yeah, but right now I am I don't know how this has been changed in me, but I will not say anything for sure, like because i I will take care of it, like okay no one should get hurt by my words at least. So I get
Okay.
irritated, and for sure I don't keep that in mind, because middle phase was though I will not say but I will have in mind, but gradually it reduced, and now it's like okay I gradually it's reduced. I will not say it's nil, but definitely it's reduced a lot for sure. Like I can feel that okay at least I am not keeping that bad things in my mind for that person for sure.
Okay. Hey, nice. And since you disclosed, I'll also disclose. So yesterday evening, I was feeling very tired, and my daughter did not want to go to sleep. She just hear more and more and more stories. And at first, I thought, "Oh, that's cute," until it wasn't. And then I started feeling in that there was some frustration, some feelings of powerlessness. Uh, she's 4. There's not really much that I can or would do to display my anger, or elements of irritation in that. So it's manifested in being a little more short, like that's all the stories, or it's really time to sleep, and then just kind of trying to contain those feelings that I was experiencing. And the interesting thing about it is that anger can take so many different forms. It can, like in the story I just shared, as soon as she fell asleep, she was back to being my little angel. And I really didn't. It was
Yeah.
there, but there are other times where that anger runs deeper. It pervades more facets of our life, even. And so, I want to spend a little time exploring that aspect of anger. And so, just to define anger, and I wanted to start with these stories as just to get our minds meditating on anger, just the different qualities or aspects of it, just in our lives. And one way that we can look at it is it's an intense emotion. It's related to feeling wronged in some way. So I have this expectation that wasn't fulfilled, and I'm having problems managing that reality check. And a little bit of a tangent, but one thing I wanted to show as well, I'm a big fan of this, is called a feelings wheel. So just give me a minute. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll zoom in a little bit. And so this angry, what we're talking about today, anatomy of anger, actually has such a wide spectrum. Have you seen this before?
Oh, no.
Okay. Well, I love it. Let me zoom in more on the anger part. And I was kind of intrigued that what we'd consider generally the positive emotions like happy or away form such a small chunk of this emotional wheel. But that's another conversation. So the spectrum of angry can, according to this wheel, go all the way from betrayed to dismissive. Everything in between. And just take a look at the words in between. That when I say I'm angry, or someone tells us I'm angry, fill in the blank of why, there's actually a lot of stuff potentially going underneath the surface of that word. And it's not necessarily our job to play psychoanalyst for our friend or ourselves, but just to understand that angry is such a broad word, and we need to properly hear ourselves as well as others if they're expressing that anger to get a better sense of what is tied into this anger. So I'll stop sharing, because anger is described actually as a secondary emotion. It's one that comes as a response to an initial feeling. Let's say, for example, I really wanted something for my birthday. I don't know, I'm just making something up. I really wanted a bike for my birthday. And I opened up all my presents and I didn't get that bike for my birthday. And so there was disappointment. And then there might be some anger. Well, I told so-and-so that I really wanted a bike, and they promised they'd get me a bike, but they didn't get me a bike. I feel mad. So the initial feeling wasn't anger, I feel mad. It was disappointed. I had expected something. I thought I had communicated my wants to somebody else in a way that was clear to me, but it ultimately wasn't fulfilled. And now I need to, after I've settled through my emotional state, I need to figure out another way to fulfill that desire. It could be other initial feelings like injustice, sadness, betrayal, all those other words that we looked at in the feelings wheel. And of course, many more that aren't in the wheel. So again, secondary emotion, it's something that is derived from an initial feeling. So there's a primary feeling and a secondary emotion. And within that anger, we can look at two types of anger, one being primary, the other secondary. So primary anger, we can look at as short-term anger that may be proportionate to the grievance versus secondary, which is disproportionate and held and not constructive. So we can also look at it in the buckets of primary as constructive and secondary as destructive. So establishing the concept that there's, I don't necessarily want to say positive anger, but at least constructive or productive anger versus destructive anger that ultimately leaves everybody dissatisfied. And secondary anger, one expression I think is shooting a cannon to get a mosquito or something like that, shooting at a mosquito with a cannon, where the response is out of proportion based on some common established social norms. And so what provokes that anger? So we're feeling angry, we're exploring some of the feelings associated behind that anger. But what kinds of situations provoke that anger? So, Vaishali, you were mentioning that it's something you experience almost daily, and that I experience almost daily, and I'm sure anybody experiences almost daily. What kinds of situations tend to provoke anger? Like one of the things we talked about was unmet expectations, or like the blocking of my desire or intention. What other kinds of things might provoke anger?
Jealousy.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like I realized it after long time, I think, because definitely you don't get everything what you desire and whatever in your life. So I think sometimes it's not direct cause, but I only analyzed by myself that, okay, I am jealous of that person in some way. That's why indirectly it comes out in some other way. Not that cause like exactly, but in deep, I think that's the reason that I found out for some situations.
Yeah, that's a nice point, because like in that jealousy, there's a sense of powerlessness as well.
Yeah.
That, somebody is in a certain situation that I'm not, or has some facility that I don't have, and I would just really like be in that situation or have that thing or whatever it might be. Could be a myriad of things. Maybe it's really unfair that person seems to have this and I don't, or whatever it might be. I mean, these are all like what you're sharing, what you're illustrating with that is definitely provokes anger in me and you and many of us. And it's not a situation that we like either. So, and in terms of the effects of anger, so it's kind of interesting because there's a little bit of a jump as well between let's just say a more passive emotion like jealousy or disappointment or sadness or any kind of like gateway emotions that may result in anger, because anger tends to have a more active connotation where there is the emotional experience of it, but then that emotional experience, if not properly regulated, also may lead to activity. And the regulation of that emotion also could lead to activity, but there's very different outcomes of the activity. So I'm just going to share a quick video on the effects of anger on the body. So we have this thing that's happening, and we've talked about it on an emotional level, but it also has very real impacts on our body. And even research shows that it reduces life expectancy for people that essentially suffer from chronic anger. So I'll just open that up, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen after the commercial concludes. Skip ad. I'm gonna go ahead and share it now. It's called The Science of Anger. Let me just make sure it was sharing properly. Tab. Okay, yes, share audio.
Life Noggin. Have you ever been so angry that you start to relate to those cartoon
You can hear
characters who
okay?
have steam coming out of their ears? Or maybe you
Yeah.
feel like your blood is boiling
Okay.
beneath your skin. Even though you may know what the external cause of your anger is, what's actually going on inside your body when you're angry? That's what we're gonna find out. Imagine that you are driving on a freeway and somebody suddenly cuts you off. You will most likely get angry and either honk your horn or possibly give them a not-so-nice hand gesture. Admit it, we've all done it before. Inside your brain, the amygdala, which responds to outside stimuli, processes the car cutting you off and coordinates the release of neurotransmitters called catecholamines. These cause you to feel a burst of energy preparing you for physical action. The hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine are also released, increasing your blood pressure. Your heart rate increases and your face may flush as the blood rushes to your extremities. If you have ever seen someone so angry that they turn red as a lobster, this is why. If you want to keep this anger at bay, you'll have to use your prefrontal cortex. You can think of this as the area that controls your judgment. And if you don't use your prefrontal cortex, you may act aggressively towards others. Take Phineas Gage as an example. In 1848, while at work, a tamping iron was shot through his left cheek and exited through the top of his head. Somehow he survived, but his frontal lobe was severely damaged. After his injury, he is said to have been fitful, irreverent, and had the animal passions of a strong man. Perhaps the damage to his frontal lobe destroyed his ability to control his behavior. He was not only a new man, but also one incapable of self-constraint. It's also important to note that constant chronic anger can greatly increase a person's chance of getting a heart disease like high blood pressure or heart attacks. Anger and the heart are very connected. This is because epinephrine and norepinephrine constrict blood vessels, making your heart pump harder. These two hormones also increase the amount of glucose and fatty acids in the blood. The increased levels can lead to damage in artery walls and speed up the process of atherosclerosis. When the fatty plaque builds up in the arteries, it narrows them and decreases the flow of oxygen-rich blood to the body. This can lead to a heart attack, stroke, or death. But fear not, there are healthy ways to control your anger, such as meditation, anger management therapy, exercise, or even just relaxing and doing something fun, like watching a few Life Noggin videos. So tell us, what is one thing that makes you angry, and what...
Okay.
Nice.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has very real effects on our body, which I know that at least while he was talking, I was reflecting on at least the physical symptoms that are easier to perceive, like the increase in heart rate, the intensity of breathing, the sort of heightened awareness. Now, unfortunately, that heightened awareness doesn't necessarily translate to heightened intelligence, but at least heightened awareness, because that anger is getting ready, is the body getting ready to do some kind of action. The words that they used in that video was the fight or flight type of reaction. That if there's something that's eliciting anger, it means there's a sense of injustice. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that idea of justice or injustice actually means. Because in terms of injustice, it's just what I see as an injustice for me in many cases. It could be anger on behalf of somebody else, but going back to the conversations we had about who I am, about overcoming divisions, it's still very much in relation to the filters of our lives, how we see things, how we value things. Another very real impact of anger. How many of us, well, that sounds funny. How many of us have said something in anger and to somebody that was initially more calm, and that something that I said in anger, or you said in anger, may have brought that other person to anger as well. Like the idea that anger begets anger. And so there's a very real impact on our relationships. I saw this video, I couldn't find it in time for this discussion, but it was comparing anger as a ball that just gets passed around. somebody is the recipient of somebody else's anger. And without a proper way to manage that emotion, it becomes just a game of hot potato. I received this angry feeling, and that carries through to other interactions I have for the rest of that day. And it's this whole chain reaction. The person that I express my anger to in an unhealthy way might feel angry, who might express it to somebody else, who might then feel angry, and so on and so on and so on, where it just becomes this destructive wave of anger. And there was this really nice quote about anger that I came across, which is, speak when you are angry, and you will make the best speech you'll ever regret. And that was spoken by this gentleman named Lawrence Peter, who is a Canadian educator and creator of something called the Peter Principle, which I found fascinating. Total tangent about what the Peter Principle is. But as a working professional, it really resonated, where in a hierarchy, this is the basis of the Peter Principle that he developed. In a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. In time, every post tends to be occupied by an employee who is incompetent to carry out its duties. Work is accomplished by those employees who have not yet reached their level of incompetence. So he was sharing his wisdom also on anger and making the best speech that you'll ever regret. And it's very true. It might feel really good in that moment, but yeah. When we allow ourselves to be controlled by anger, that's all it leaves us, is regret. And there's also a nice quote that I came across by this 5th century Buddhist scholar named Buddha Ghosh, who says, by doing this, meaning holding on to or contemplating on acting out of anger, by doing this, you are like a man who wants to hit another and picks up a burning ember or excrement in his hand, and so first burns himself or makes himself stink. So uncontrolled anger begets anger, has a very real impact on our relationships, on our own future. In the process, a destructive expression of anger, we end up burning ourselves or stinking. And so it leads to this question of, why does it happen? Like it leaves us blind, essentially, both in terms of who I am and all the others around me, because anger doesn't always discriminate. Uncontrolled anger, when I am consumed by anger, my faculty of discrimination is reduced. I could be brought to say and do things to people that in any other situation I would profess to love or care very much about. And in that anger, depending on the foundation of that anger, it may cover my own self more so than usual. And one of the goals of this process of, which we can talk more about in future sessions, this process of Bhakti Yoga, is to really discover who I am and what should I be doing, how should I be acting with that understanding. So this being consumed by anger takes us further away from achieving that level of understanding. And so the Bhagavad Gita gives a nice presentation on what brings us to anger. Because if we're saying that uncontrolled anger is so destructive, can't I just stop being angry? Like, can I just, whatever comes, okay, I'll just smile and just poke me. If you think you can mechanically control anger, there's something called, that's an easy answer. Yes, no. But let's just think of mosquitoes. Find a way to spend the night into a mosquito-filled pond with no nets, and just see how well you're able to mechanically control anger. It's torture. It'll be torture. And the torture won't stop even after you leave the pond, because those bite marks will itch for at least a few days. But the mosquitoes will be happy. Bhagavad Gita talks about an 8-step process of anger. And it's 2 verses in the 2nd chapter, 262 and 263, where Krishna says, while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. And from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. From anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So that's quite a journey. So the Bhagavad Gita takes us on an 8-step journey from the seed of anger all the way through the ramifications of that anger. And not from the perspective of how it may impact our relationships around us, or, oh, my blood pressure is going to go up, or anything like that, but it's actually looking at the more subtle impacts of anger. So let's unpack that 8-step process. So there were 8 pieces. Contemplate the objects of the senses, develop attachment, lust develops, anger develops, delusion arises, memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and fall down. So contemplate the objects of the senses. In other words, wouldn't that be nice if fill in the blank? So when we use the words contemplate the objects of the senses, contemplate, think about, objects of the senses. So something that I'm getting some kind of pleasure from, or that that my senses will get some kind of satisfaction from. Eating some nice food, touching something nice and soft, being in a comfortable situation, or being in a situation that would allow me to get all of these comforts that then my sense of touch or my sense of taste or my sense of sight would be very pleased to interact with. And then there's the developing attachment, step 2. So the first one is just contemplating. And then step 2 is the answer, yes, it would be nice. I would love it. And that's all I want. And then lust develops. So not lust in the sense of what may be seen in more modern culture with like a sexual connotation or anything like that, but lust in the sense of I see that as an object for my enjoyment, me and me alone. And thinking back to last week's session, that sense of I and mine could be expanded beyond this physical body. It could be my family, my community, my country, my religion, my species, and so on. So yes, in order to feel happy and satisfied and fulfilled and like I've achieved, I've done it, I need to have that. That's it. And step 4, anger develops. Now, if I'm thinking something will make me happy, and I believe that that's the end all be all, I need to have that, why would anger develop? Like that seems like the total opposite of what I'm looking for. So why is anger the natural outcome of becoming attached to a certain object and then just sincerely endeavoring for that object to satisfy? Why would I become angry from that? What do you think?
For example, let's say food test,
What's that?
like food test.
Okay.
Like, so if we have too much attachment for a test, like I kind of like only the particular way of test. And if I don't get that, I will just get angry. Even with me, I think, if it doesn't come out that way.
Okay. I see what you're saying. So you're saying because it maybe doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess when there's like a $100 million lottery pool, it's only a small handful of people that get it. It's not all the millions of people that get it. So yeah, not everybody can have that that desire satisfied. And so when that desire isn't satisfied, what you're saying, Vaishali, is that I might feel angry because I placed so many hopes and dreams and everything else on that one thing, achieving that one thing, getting that one thing. But I didn't get that one thing. And another aspect of anger developing is, well, what happens? Let's say you get that thing that you're wanting. What happens? You achieved it. Now there's something else you might want. And so it's a little more subtle, but there is that anger born of disappointment. Many times that thing that we placed all of our hopes and aspirations on to make me feel happy, accomplished, fulfilled. Maybe it was nice for a day or a week or a month, but it didn't leave me feeling happy and satisfied. And so that emptiness was still there. But in this model that we're given, that's not the end of the road. That anger develops. Then delusion arises. So this is talking about that blinding aspect of anger. That I suddenly see the world through that particular lens of my anger, and that's it. I've had conversations with friends where I'm feeling angry or they're feeling angry. And I sometimes made the mistake of saying, well, maybe this other person that you think did you wrong was onto something. So I got some practical realization on delusion arises. And I've also been there, been on the receiving end of that, where somebody meaning well gave, in retrospect, very fair, sage advice. But I was in that memory is bewildered, or in that delusion arises state, and I did not want to hear it. My anger was real. That's how it is. And nobody could tell me or convince me in that moment otherwise. And from that delusion, memory is bewildered. So that's step 6. Blinded by that short-term slight. So let's say a good friend does something that makes me feel angry. In the heat of that moment, I may just completely forget all of the wonderful qualities of this person, all of the wonderful things that he or she has done for me, supported me, how we've grown together, whatever it might be. All that forgotten. Well, they helped you get your current job. They helped teach you all about cycling or running or whatever it is. Yeah, that's fine. But they took the last cookie. Unforgivable, or whatever it might be. I'm just being a little silly with that. But the idea that that anger just completely diminishes everything else about that person, because in the moment, my attachment to eating that cookie, I'll just use that example, is the most important, the most real thing in my life. And so intelligence is lost. So I'm in delusion, memory is bewildered, and intelligence is lost. So I do things in the heat of the moment, is an expression used. I think in legal circuits, there's the concept of crimes of passion, where my intelligence is lost. I do things that are regrettable and not in my, nor the other person's best interest. So we can think of self-destructive behavior, like the jilted lover kind of thing, where, oh, I feel rejected, so I'll show them I'm going to jump off of a bridge, or whatever it might be, something terrible. that in that anger, you know, in a moment of clarity, in a moment of fully exercising my faculty of intelligence, what does, you know, something like self-harm or even the abuse of others, what does that actually accomplish? It's a very twisted outcome of enormous pain, enormous anger that's ultimately not good for anybody. And so intelligence is lost. I am not acting in my interest. And funny enough, and I came across this article in a parenting magazine, and it was talking about there's a support group. I couldn't find the name in time for this, but there's a support group that's dedicated to parents who feel so overwhelmed and angry with their kids that they want to, these are for parents that feel that so strongly and they have this desire to harm their kids, but instead of harming their kids, this organization says, call us instead to express your anger rather than taking it out on your kids, which I honestly think is wonderful. Like it's wonderful that there is an organization out there that does this, because it requires a little bit of presence of mind for people to use a service like that, but it's addressing that aspect that intelligence is lost in the heat of that anger, maybe the overwhelming pressure or stress that we're experiencing and not seeing a way out of it. And so ultimately what all that leads to, so all the way starting from contemplating the senses, wouldn't it be nice, to I'm going to do something that's not in anyone's best interest. That takes me to the point of falling down, a downward spiral of just repeating this pattern of behavior and getting more and more immersed in this frustration of not being able to satisfy the thing that is driving a lot of aspects of life, namely my senses, and the center of the senses, my mind. It's what drives most activity. And so what I'm going to show you is there's this really wonderful drama put together by a monk. His name is Bhakti Marg Swami. And he does this two versions of a drama of the Bhagavad Gita. And in this section, he really nicely illustrates this whole 8-step being overcome by anger process. So give me a minute. I'm going to pull that up. And the audio is not spectacular, so I'm hoping that it will still be clear in this recording. But I'll also put the link in the chat if you want to just check it out later. Okay, you can see?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear?
Our intelligence becomes
You can hear?
blocked when the senses
Yes.
contact sense objects. Now, here is what happens when contemplating those sense objects.
Check out my wheels, homie!
We look at something that catches our attention and think to ourselves,
I want this!
that then becomes
I really, really want this!
that then turns into
I must have this!
finally it becomes
If I don't have this, I will be really, really angry!
did not. Apparently Carla here from CBC News just on the scene. What's happened, sir?
You're the crazy!
When one gets angry, one forgets what is right and what is wrong. Our intelligence gets spoiled. We need to think with a clear mind.
Okay. So 8-step process in action, all the way from appreciating somebody's car to it's a drama to illustrate a point, but that's ultimately the outcome. And so one thing that may come to mind is, why do we sometimes get angry and other times not? Could be the same action. For some of us, like for certain individuals, it may not be a big deal. For somebody else, it may be the end of the world. Like in that skit, one person really wanted that car, but everybody else was there just appreciating the car, but they didn't want to do anything about it. So it ties back to the different filters, the modes, the influence of goodness, passion, and ignorance, and how that shapes our desires and how we view certain situations. And so it's also then affecting how we interpret the situation around us. Because just going back to the example I shared earlier of my daughter just wanting to be told so many stories, not sleep. There are some nights where I would just smile and really relish that moment and just think, okay, I'll just keep the stories coming, no problem. And then other times where on my mind, I'd be thinking, oh, okay, I have this many things to do and I'm really exhausted. I don't want to stay up late again and all those things. And so that kind of emotional state, that background affects how I interpret that situation. The situation of my daughter not wanting to sleep hasn't changed. It's just me that changed. I'm bringing different levels of baggage to the situation. And so it can be summed up as the immediate perception. Is it something bad? So let me just assess, is it bad in relation to what my values, my priorities, my immediate needs are? And then the second consideration is, how should I cope with that supposed bad thing? And how severe is that bad thing? Is it something that isn't a big deal? In which case, okay, it was on my radar, but not a big deal. So one way to phrase that is getting over it. Like initially it was a source of potential anger, but it turned out, okay, in that internal check, it didn't really shape up to anything. And then the other end of the spectrum is it's getting in the way of some objective. And it's an emotion, so anger, it's an emotion whose onset may be difficult to control, but the great news is we can do something about it. We can control the recognition of that anger. So going back to that 8-step process, so the thinking, the feeling, yes, the willing, I need to do whatever I can to get that thing, we can start to recognize those steps in our daily situations. And through intelligence, because one of the things is when we're talking about identity of soul, there's a hierarchy of this body where the lowest level, the bottom of the spectrum, is the senses, and then there's the mind, and then there's the intelligence, then there's the sense of the false sense of identity. We can start to use the faculty of intelligence to control the mind or emotional state and the senses. And a lot of that comes with just some very simple tools that I just want to talk a little bit about. So the first one related to just managing and expressing anger. Again, to reiterate, it's super important. The goal is not to make anger zero. We're just smiling and just drifting by the wind. That's not the goal. That's artificial. It's not sustainable. But what we can do is manage, channel in a healthy way, express that emotion so that we don't necessarily have to go down that cycle of the full 8-step process. Maybe we can stop at step number 4 where anger develops. And then we don't have to, we can bypass at least the brunt of the delusion, the memory bewilderment, the intelligence lost, and the further implications in that same cycle. So the first thing that we can do is just in purely the expression of that feeling. Instead of saying, I'm angry, or even on the positive side, I'm happy, I'm sad. Because let's really think about that sentence. I am fill in the blank of the emotion. If somebody is to ask you, who are you? Would anyone in their right mind respond, who are you? I'm angry. Oh, nice to meet you, angry. People usually wouldn't identify with that emotion, but it has that subtle and very real effect of saying, I'm angry. Because what I'm communicating when I say I'm angry is that is the thing that is defining me and consuming me. And so a more healthy way to understand that emotion and even express that emotion isn't I'm angry, it's I feel angry. I am feeling angry. See that emotion not as my identity, I am angry, but rather as something I am experiencing. I feel angry. Because as long as I see that as my identity, there's that trick that it's permanent because identity doesn't change, like that sense of I doesn't change. But I am feeling this, I am experiencing this is transient. And so we can start to see that emotion not as who I am, but as just something that I'm going through. And it can be a gateway to a healthy conversation that can actually deepen relationships. So one tool that I've learned by this group was it's just a very simple sort of template to express anger, but I absolutely love it. And it's just 2 components. It's when I fill in the blank of see this or experience this, I feel this. So to go back to my daughter's example, when I was feeling some anger, I didn't tell this to her because she's a 4-year-old and it's just one of the joys of parenting. It's I could say something like, when I am asked to read a lot of stories well beyond your bedtime, I am feeling frustrated that I am not able to do other things that I had planned to do. Or it's probably a little more effective when talking to an adult or somebody with, just more developed. But you get the idea that it's not about accusatory. It's not about taking the anger I'm feeling and spreading it all around for all the world to experience. It's just about communicating a feeling that feels real and present and natural, and using it to share the idea that I have some kind of unmet need. And so what I wanted to do was just kind of do a little practical exercise related to that, where I just thought up a couple of scenarios before this and, just wanted to ask how you would translate this experience to a when I fill in the blank, I feel fill in the blank. So maybe we'll use a lighthearted example, I guess, for this. So what's your favorite food, by the way, Vaishali?
Many.
What is it?
Like many things. Not one.
Pick one. Pick one. Every time you see it, you just your face just beams.
Pakoda, I think then.
Oh, what kind of pakoda?
Any kind of pakoda.
Okay, we'll just say hot cabbage leaf pakoda. Okay. Okay, so I'll say this. Vaishali, I know I promised you a fresh, hot, crunchy, perfectly spiced cabbage leaf pakoda. I know I promised to bring you some, but I forgot and I ate them all. What do you think?
definitely I will feel bad.
So use that template. Try that
Oh.
template. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not
What was
trying
the
to force you and
template?
make you feel angry.
What was the template? I forgot. Like,
Oh, in order to, or I'm sorry, uh, uh, when I experience this or see this, I felt or I feel, fill in the feeling.
oh, when I don't get, like, now for this exercise, it's pakoda. I
Mhm.
will definitely get upset.
You'll feel upset. Okay. Yeah, and especially so because I forgot. I told you I'd give it to you, and then I just forgot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when so there's actually a few. There could be a few emotions working there as well. There's the disappointment that you didn't get the pakoda, and then there might be even an element of hurt that I forgot about you.
Mm, yeah.
And so just being
Yes. Like,
attuned to that. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, like both things. Like, uh, definitely pakoda. I will like think of, okay, I will get pakoda today and all. But we have some expectations from certain people, no? So like we are for sure, okay, they will not, like, now, like in this example, you forgot. So I am like, okay, how can he forgot like that? Like, how can he forget? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there's a few statements in there. There's when I didn't receive the pakoras that you promised, I felt forgotten. I didn't feel cared for,
Hmm.
disappointed, whatever it might be. And the nice thing is, as me in this case, the bad guy, the perpetrator, will say, by you expressing yourself in that way of this is how I'm feeling about this specific behavior, it does a few things. One, the person that you're sharing this with is not on the defensive and can't deny anything you're saying. I'm feeling forgotten. No, you're not. I can't say that. You're expressing how you're feeling. And you're expressing your perception of the experience. And the great thing is it opens the door for an honest dialogue. So situations that might have escalated to, oh, really? You think this is the first time you've forgotten this? And then just bring up a whole laundry list of all of the transgressions from the last 20 years. When it really just started with a pakora. It opens the door to a healthy conversation where there's grounds to seek mutual understanding. Oh, I know I promised you the pakora, and I'm very sorry that I just completely forgot. I was dealing with this other stressful situation, and just when I feel stressed, I eat, and the pakoras were right there, and I wasn't really thinking about it. So I know that's something you care about, and so I feel very, very disappointed in myself for not being able to fulfill my promise. Just that kind of healthy communication can take place, so that an opportunity to become angry and explode became an opportunity to share more of our lives and become closer with the other person. It's not about suppressing that feeling. It's about channeling that feeling so that it can be favorable. And tied into that, the opposite of anger is forgiveness, just letting go. Okay, we've had a long friendship. This transgression of the forgotten pakora, in the grand scheme of things, this is a person that I still relate to nicely and still care deeply about. So just making a conscious effort to just process, to think. There's enormous opportunity in just to just improve the quality of our relationships with just that breather, that pause. Like, especially when some people are feeling or experiencing anger, sometimes we just need space just to process everything that's happening. And in that space, in that processing, can come back more clear head. So not taking that anger and escalating it to the remaining 4 steps. And it's also important to see the power of like what we practice with mantra meditation, because these emotional states are in the realm of the mind. It's the mind as the center of the senses is really synthesizing all this information from our senses. And the disturbance of the mind that results in anger is because of the mind not being able to focus on what's really important and being able to see things in their proper context. And so that's why, one of the many reasons why we practice mantra meditation. So man is mind and tra is to relieve. So meditation that relieves the mind. And that will be discussed in future sessions. But just being able to keep that balanced space, to remove the filters, to keep as much sight on who I am, my true identity as possible, becomes so important in just managing the anger. I'll leave it at that. Vaishali, if you wanted to add anything or comments or.
Yes, like I will share my experience with anger. Like if I get angry, then at that same moment I can't think of anything. Like it's, I always will take time and then think over it. Okay, what went wrong and everything. But at that very moment, it's not possible for me to think. But definitely, I will think over it after that's whatever had happened.
The best.
So I think developing that, yeah.
The best speech you'll ever regret.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think at that moment we should have that thinking capacity. I think.
It can be challenging, and that's why like that's why I'm a big fan of that tool, that when I fill in the blank, I fill in the blank, because even in the heat of the moment, you can just grab that tool and be like, you know, it still is, it's a mechanical way, but it's a great way to present that. And the nice thing is that through this mantra meditation, our intelligence becomes refined, and we're able to, as we take on that practice of meditation more and more, we're able to be more present, be able to bring the mind back more easily and see things more clearly, so that we're not consumed and blinded by this anger. So it's a very gradual process of just how to even manage our emotions. The interesting thing is we spend a lifetime just understanding how to work and interact with this body that we're born with.
Yeah.
All right, I guess that's it for today. Then, thank you so much. We'll meet again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very nice session.
Certainly a pleasure.
Hare Krishna.